Okay, let's get right into it. You know that age-old debate, right? Faith versus reason. For centuries, it's felt like this epic tug-of-war with no winner. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? Today's explainer is diving into a really fascinating text that reframes this entire argument, not as a war, but as a brilliant game of chess, one with a very definitive final move.
So here's the big question that's always on the table. Can this conflict between militant atheism and fundamentalist belief ever actually be resolved? I mean, it feels like they're not even playing the same game, you know? They're speaking totally different languages. But the source we're looking at today suggests there's a way through this intellectual maze. And this is where it gets really interesting. The source uses this core metaphor of a chess match. So, picture two grandmasters sitting across from each other. In one corner, you've got the militant atheist, armed with pure logic and historical critique. And in the other, the fundamentalist believer, whose defense is built on doctrine and faith. The whole idea here is that if we understand their classic moves, we can actually see a path to a final, elegant conclusion.
All right, first up, the atheist's opening move. This is all about going on the offensive, an aggressive, rationalist attack that's designed to tear down the very foundations of belief.
So the atheist's primary attack, their go-to move, is to use history and science to deconstruct anything supernatural. We're talking miracles, doctrines, the whole shebang, and just label it all as human invention. But check out the countermove our source proposes. It doesn't try to prove the resurrection with historical facts. Instead, it defines it as a transcendent event, something completely outside the rules of rational analysis. It just sidesteps the attack entirely.
And the result of this exchange is absolutely crucial. The source says the militant atheist is left, quote, disarmed. Now, why is that? Well, it's because their main weapons, logic, reason, historical evidence, they have no grip on an event that's explicitly placed beyond their reach. The argument just slips right through their fingers.
Okay, so let's flip the board. Next up, we have the believer's counter. This is typically a defensive game, you know? It's all about protecting traditional dogma from the attacks of modern critique. This perfectly illustrates their classic strategy. The standard move for a fundamentalist believer is to be wary of or even reject historical research, especially the idea of Jesus as a human, apocalyptic prophet. It just feels like a threat to his divinity. But the counter move here is incredibly bold. It basically says, so what? Even if historical research shows Jesus was an apocalyptic prophet, faith doesn't crumble because it rests on one single indestructible foundation, the resurrection.
So what's the result of this move? The fundamentalist believer is left bewildered. They're caught totally off guard because that defensive wall they've always put up, well, it turns out they might not even need it. They can't just fall back on traditional dogma when the very core of their faith has been positioned to stand firm, completely independent of those historical arguments they were so afraid of.
So, with both of those opening moves totally neutralized, the game hits what the source calls a theological stalemate. The board is essentially cleared. Neither player can win using their old, predictable moves.
But here's the thing. This stalemate isn't a draw, not even close. In fact, it's the whole point of the strategy. By wiping the board clean of all the old, tired arguments, it sets the stage for a completely new move, a move that just wasn't possible before.
And here it is. The source calls this the checkmate. It's not about one side winning and the other losing. It's about a synthesis. It's about creating a brand new idea from the pieces that are left on the board.
This is the absolute heart of the argument. The synthesis takes two ideas that seem to totally contradict each other, and it just joins them. First, it fully accepts the findings of historical research. Jesus was an apocalyptic prophet. Second, it holds tight to the core of faith. The resurrection is a transcendent, indestructible event. It's a combination that, according to the source, has never really been built before. The real power of this synthesis is that it makes the old debate completely obsolete. The atheist can't really attack the historical Jesus because this new position agrees with them. And the fundamentalist can't retreat into pure dogma because their position is already grounded in that indestructible, transcendent foundation. Neither side can land a finishing blow. So let's just walk through that logic one more time, step by step. The atheist is disarmed. The believer is bewildered. This opens the door for a new, unassailable synthesis that takes elements from both worlds. And the final result, according to our source, checkmate. The game is over.
And look, this isn't just some abstract thought experiment. The source makes a final, really bold claim. By resolving this intellectual chess match, it argues that the path is cleared for nothing less than a new rebirth of Christian faith. one that isn't afraid of science and history, but is still firmly rooted in its core beliefs. Which kind of leaves us with a final, provocative question to think about. When an argument is framed as a checkmate, does it really end the debate for everyone? Or does it just create a new, maybe even more resilient space for belief to exist in the modern world? What does a game-changing idea like this truly accomplish? It's definitely something to chew on.